Um, I know that to many folks here, Bernard Lynch really doesn't need an introduction because you come already deeply connected with him, deeply moved by his ministry, his passion, his tenaciousness. For those who don't know Bernard, he's a priest, a psychologist, a son, a brother, a husband, an uncle, an out gay man, an advocate, and a proud son of County Clare in Ireland. Uh, he has authored 2 books, A Priest on Trial, and If It Wasn't Love, Sex, Death, and God, is also the subject of 2 television documentaries, AIDS, A Priest's Testament, and Soul Survivor. And there's also a documentary film called A Priest on Trial, which covers much of what we'll be discussing this evening. Bernard is a longtime member, presider, and board member for Dignity New York. And I learned just this weekend that he had also presided monthly for Dignity Philadelphia in the 1970s and 80s. And when gay men started dying of an unknown disease in the early 1980s, Bernard was on the front lines, ministering to those whom many met only with fear. And this is the backdrop for our conversation tonight. Bernard and his husband, Billy Desmond, are visiting New York for the first time since the pandemic. We're glad to welcome them back to the States. And Bernard has been gracious in giving some of his vacation time to talk with us tonight. So we're very proud and very happy to welcome Bernard and to begin this conversation about the most recent exploration of his life, work, and trials, the Gold Medal Award winning Claire FM podcast called Falsely Accused. So welcome, Bernard.
Thank you, Marian, and thank you all for being with me.
Yes. Right. So Bernard and I will talk for maybe about 35 minutes or so, and then we're certainly happy to take, or Bernard will be happy to take questions and comments from those of you who want to follow up on anything we cover or things that we left out. There's also an awfully lot to explore. So I guess I'd like to start, Bernard, with just some background on how you moved from being, a young person living in Ennis in Ireland to becoming involved with Dignity New York. Can you give us kind of the quick trajectory of how that happened?
Okay. It sounds more like the Sound of Music, actually, but I had to come to New York. In those days, obedience was the raison d'etre of being a member of religious orders, et cetera, et cetera. So I was sent to New York for further studies in 1975. And that was at Fordham University. At that time, Father Hennessy, who was my mentor and on the admissions team of the university for overseas students, for some reason, I suppose he could see me in a way that others didn't, he insisted I go into therapy as part of my own study. Now, that wasn't mandatory at that time, but for me, it became mandatory. And I entered therapy 75 with a Dr. Louis Padovano, SJ. And it was there I uncovered that I am a gay man. I had fought it with heart and soul all my life. Up to then, I was 27, 28 then. And that was what a discovery. And naturally and necessarily, being an Irish-born Catholic, I wanted to find somewhere where I could maybe begin to accept what I was, what I am. And Yellow Pages, Dignity. And I went to Dignity New York. We were meeting at the Church of the Good Shepherd behind Lincoln Center. And you can stop me at any moment. And when I went there, I was immediately looking for the tabernacle and the statue of the Blessed Mother and the Stations of the Cross. And I turned to the guy next to me. I was incognito. I was only Bernard, and I was posing as a teacher, not as a priest. And I said to the guy next to me, "Where's the statue of the Blessed Mother?" And he's looking at me and saying, "Well, you're off the boat. There's no question about it." And he said, "We're in a Protestant church." Now, at that time, I didn't know which was worse, like being a homosexual or being in a Protestant church. Both were equally sinful in the Catholic Church's eyes. And I did a somersault. I mean, what are we doing in a Catholic church? All we want to do is worship and celebrate Mass. I mean, so that was my road to Tarsus into dignity, as it were, a conversion. I did fall off my horse, and I got very involved slowly but surely after that.
As I understand it, you were just, as you said, just Bernard, a teacher, and then not too long into your time with Dignity, you showed up one Sunday, and the rest of the community was there, but the priest wasn't there. So you kind of outed yourself as a Catholic priest, and thus began your ministry as a presider. Is that right?
Absolutely. Well, I outed and was outed, and I mean, dignity will always be for me my Bethlehem. Always. It's where I found my savior to save myself. And I wasn't as even as outspoken. I was shy and very quiet spoken. And I said to the guy next to me, "I'm a priest." And of course he immediately goes, "He's a priest, he's a priest." So I knew in my heart and soul my job and duty was to say Mass. And I must say the people at Dignity that time, they really embraced me. They really, really embraced me affectively, as well as and therefore empowered me to be strong and to say Mass and to become part of them. So that was my birth, really. It was a good birth.
That's
Safe birth.
wonderful. Yeah, I love that's kind of one of those God works in mysterious ways, with a happy outcome kind of stories. I love that. And then skipping ahead, several years, you were, of course, still in New York in the early 80s when gay men started becoming very sick very quickly with this unknown disease that went through a number of iterations in how it was understood and what it was called. And it was a terribly frightening time, I imagine. And your response was not to shy away from these men who are sick, not to leave them isolated, not to not touch them. Can you tell a story of one of those early encounters? What was happening in this young person's life that you were?
Well, as you know, again, in the Basilis, the priest was kind of a shaman, witch doctor, bardash, whatever you want. And, when people were experiencing ignominious suffering and death, they turned to the priest as if the priest had answers, which I didn't. I mean, I was as lost as anybody else. And I remember there was one guy, the first guy, Gustavo, who died at his own hand. And I was seeing him, and he must have taken his life in 81. And he did it because, and so many more like him afterwards did the same, because doctors didn't know, and there was no cure, there was nothing happening. And I asked, it was either after his Requiem Mass, which I celebrated. We were now in St. Francis Xavier, and I asked for help because I was being overwhelmed with requests for help. And I was working full time as campus minister at Mount St. Michael's Academy. So thus that became, with a few others from Dignity AIDS Ministry Program. And it's hard to use the word it flourished, because my God, what a macabre flourishing it was. But it didn't take courage. The word courage lost meaning. I mean, I was already losing people that I was very close to. And of course, I thought, as every gay man at the time thought, my own day was dawning when I would go to the other side. And I did lose 3 of my closest priest friends. So it's hard to imagine. It's hard to go back bagging coal after you've been to the war. It's very hard to imagine what it was like. And, the questions like, how did you do it? And I don't know. I mean, we did what we had to do. We
Yes.
stood with and by each other, and you didn't think. I mean, my people were dying, and it was terrible. It wasn't just the disease of, it was the disease of shame and pain and guilt, condemnation, and
isolation. As I re-listened to the Falsely Accused podcast yesterday, what came to me was, people celebrating Pope Francis's highlighting of the ministry of accompaniment. But I just kept thinking about that in the context of the podcast about, accompaniment sounds like a lovely word, but it was really gruelingly hard, incessant, at times overwhelming work that left you and many others traumatized in that, and this was not accompaniment that, ended in a beautiful conversion kind of thing. For most of these people, it was accompaniment of them to their death, um, and I don't know if you would characterize this as a ministry of accompaniment, but that was what just felt so evident to me, and it just gave a whole new sense of what we are called to.
Well, when people talk about Dignity AIDS Ministry, and we do rightfully associate ministry with maybe praying and bringing the sacraments and the last rites, but that was the least part of it. I mean, there was as much diaper changing and cleaning up crap and urine and getting food to the person, and just sleeping over because nobody else would, and being a friend. And like, I love the Eckhartian phrase, friendship is the true face of God. And the Dignity people, for the people they were with at that time, they were the only face of God. And God didn't come into a lot of it, and a lot of people were in despair. But Sister Patrice Murphy worked with me at St. Vincent's Hospital, and when things were getting rough and the church was being so ungodly, she said to me something that has stayed with me all my life: you have to transcend the church to find God. And I'm sure you've been with people dying. I mean, all you can do is hold their hand, really, and let them go, and say things like, you're going to be okay, or I'm with you, and we'll all be in that space. We all die alone, as we know, but we had more deaths and funerals than I care to remember.
And speaking of the church being ungodly, you know, in addition to, you know, being with people, you know, there were you, yourself, and many others were calling on officials, both civil and medical and church officials, to do what they needed to do to respond to this crisis. And it clearly upset folks in the Archdiocese of New York, your work, your ministry, and you became the target of a real witch hunt uh, uh, while you were at Mount St. Michael. And it just sounds so cruel and so excruciating to have had that going on while you were, you know, while this crisis is raging around us and people are dying and people are suffering and the response is inadequate and more of this just keeps happening. But can you recount a bit of the story of what happened at Mont Saint Michel and you know the police and the archdiocese and the FBI kind of all coming at you at one time?
Yes, well, I fell out of my closet. You know, I think I was on the steps of St. Patrick's with dignity, and I had my collar on, and of course the media immediately focused in on me. So I became unwittingly and unwillingly a spokesperson, you know, so that in the Evening Post that day you had priest headline speaks out against cardinal. Now that was the headline. I mean, I was much more canny than that. They said, well, the cardinal has, you know, condemned, and of course we had the famous 1986 Ratzinger Halloween letter, and I said, I'm sure the cardinal has more compassion than that. And you know, I was being as positive as I could be, but of course the media don't like that, so they put up this priest versus cardinal, and from that time on, he was on to get me, you know, to get me out of there onto my provincial in Ireland, onto my superiors in Rome, and of course, then, as it were, God is not always the God of love as we experience God, even though I believe that absolutely that God is. But my best priest friend at Mount St. Michael's died of AIDS. And his brother, another priest working in the Diocese of Florida, started a witch hunt and formed a group with two teachers at the school, or three teachers at the school, called SAFE, which is an acronym for Students Against Faggots in Education. Hmm. And this priest came up to Mount St. Michael's Academy with a placard outside the school saying, for all to see, Father Lynch pervert, do you want him near your sons? Now, I was blown away. I was, and that's an understatement. I couldn't believe. I was after taking care of his brother. I was after visiting his brother every week. He was in Boston Hospital. I used to take a plane ride from LaGuardia to visit him, and I cared for him right up to the end. And this was, of course, I was barred from his funeral by his brother, and the brother had said to me he'd get the police to arrest me if I showed my face. So I had never had an opportunity to mourn him or say goodbye. But then the subsequent witch hunt he inaugurated was crazy. And there wasn't one person or one parents at Mount St. Michael's Academy, and I think we had 1,200 students that took that serious or asked for my resignation as a result of that placard being placed outside the school for 3 Mondays in a row, and letters distributed with,
Right.
the most gory details of how perverted we were. And we were leading, of course, we were child molesters automatically, that old
Right.
bogeyman. Um, so eventually the principal, uh, quote unquote, forced my resignation, and I couldn't fight it. I mean, and he subsequently died of AIDS himself. I
That's
mean, I
hypocrisy.
said Sound of
Right.
Music. This is the Sound of Music gone wrong. I mean,
Um,
it's incredible. He died of AIDS. I resigned. The witch hunt escalated, ultimately ending in the false prosecution and I going to trial.
right. Right. As I understand the story, all of these officials were questioning young man after young man at this school, trying to get, some kind of evidence that you had acted improperly, and it just it just wasn't there. But yet somehow uh, these nonsense false charges brought you, you were arrested, you were fingerprinted, you spent time in jail, awaiting, you had a trial, you had to go before a judge who tried to get you to confess and get out of the country. Uh, and yet I'm also so struck in your story by the absolute conviction of your community and your family who, who knew that this was not you, and who stood in solidarity with you, or who, would ask you, did you do this awful thing? And as soon as you said no, they accepted that. I mean, that's uh, in all of the turmoil and pain that you must have felt. Was there some solace in having all of this support around you, or were you not even in a place where you could take that in, given all the challenges?
It's hard to know as I look back what kept me going. Uh, Without sounding in any way pious, I'd say certainly my faith was the bulwark of my strength. And yes, the people, and very particularly the community with HIV and AIDS. I kept working with them, and dignity, of course, my family of families. They packed the courtroom uh, week in, week out, and we were going back and forth to court for a whole year. And then we had a full week of trial. But Marion, I look at it and I see, look, I was dealing with young men dying. And I had this cross to carry, to use a very Catholic metaphor, of what they were carrying. What they were carrying. I couldn't see myself. I could only. Now, there were times I did privately pray and say, it would be better if I had AIDS and died. I did. I did say that many times. But I saw such suffering, meaningless suffering. I saw such abandonment of people, young men, by their lovers, by their families, by their churches, by the state, that it was like we were a band of brothers, to use that. And there'll never be a time, I hope I'm wrong, but there'll never be a time when we will be as close to people we love and not count the cost. And I wasn't the only one. I wasn't the only one who did that. I'm an example of many. There were many in dignity doing the ministry with me and supporting me and giving me all they could.
Yeah, I understand that, and I really appreciate your honesty about the level of despair anguish that this was putting you through, these, and, and I think it's so important to tell these stories because, as you well know, there have been efforts to whitewash, the experience and the role of the church in this, and people forget or want to make it less horrific than it was. But the truth really matters.
The truth
It,
does
it
matter.
matters to all those lives. It matters, you were eventually found innocent in the court, with a judge who, the same judge who originally told you to just plead this out and get rid of it. But, you went forth with the trial, which took enormous courage, I think, and were justified in the end, uh, which is marvelous. Um, but I can only imagine that it left such scars and such emotional, spiritual, physical exhaustion, both going through the trials and the accumulated pain of all the tragedy and losses, and, witnessing all the ignominies that people who were sick were faced with at that time. So I guess, how did you ever get back onto an even footing after that experience,
Well, I'm
all
going to
those
take a
experiences?
jump here. Uh, you know, I love horses and watching. My husband is a horsey man and used to ride as a younger man, and that's the answer. My husband, in a nutshell. In a nutshell, Billy is my redemption. Love of Billy. Yeah,
Yeah, love heals. Love, time, community, faith.
love conquers all. I mean, it's a cliche, but it
Thank you.
does. It does. So that's what has restored whatever sanity I have.
Yes, yes. And, you know, I I was not at your wedding or your civil union, but I heard from a number of people who were at the wedding and from accounts of people that I met when I was in Ireland and all of that about the tremendous joy that 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 event was, not only for you and Billy, but for your families, for the friends, for the whole community. I mean, I think it seems like people understood that this was more than two people in love, two men in love, two gay men celebrating their commitment to each other, but that it really was a celebration, uh, and a conviction that love does conquer all.
Mhm.
Um, so, congratulations to both of you for that, and the model that you continue to be to so many of us. I'm getting so emotional here. It's so unlike me. um, but it's wonderful. And I think we all thank God that you two found each other, that you are family, that you are so embraced by your families and by community. And one of the things I love about your story, um, is that not only through all the trials, the AIDS ministry, the Dignity AIDS ministry being a community, and all the people who stood with you through the trials and all of that, but that now you have really been getting some recognition for who you are, for the many kinds of ministries that you've done, for the healing that you've brought to so many, for your accompaniment of people. I have to say, when I was in Ireland in, I think it was 2018 now, I walked into the EPIC, the Irish Emigration Museum, a beautiful place. And as I wandered through the rooms, all of a sudden I came upon this exhibit about Father Bernard Lynch. Here it is in this amazing worldwide destination where people who've left Ireland come back to see their stories reflected, and Irish people, and they have an entire display about your life, your work with Dignity New York, the AIDS ministry, the trial. It was really mind-blowing to see, a contemporary of mine highlighted in this museum. And I had no idea it was there. It was just really something I wandered into, and that's just one of many. And I may be missing stuff, but I know that you were given the Magnus Hirschfeld Award
Mhm.
to the cause of LGBT civil rights. Uh, I believe it was at your wedding that Andy Hum, who's with us tonight, brought a resolution from the New York City Council
Mhm.
honoring your service to the LGBTQ and AIDS communities in New York City. You received the Presidential Distinguished Service Award for the Irish abroad for charitable works. And then I understand that there is going to be a big civic reception in your home county a little bit later on this year. Can you explain what that honor is? I think that's not familiar to those of us not privileged to grow up in Ireland.
It's the highest. Well, the country is divided up into 32 counties, and the Republic 26 and Northern Ireland 6. And each county has its own quote unquote council government, as it were. And this is the highest award they can give a citizen in the county. And it's basically a recognition by County Clare of me and my work. And I would say not only me, I mean, I would say I'm getting it on behalf of the entire diaspora of people who had to leave Ireland, not just where so many millions did for work, employment, and education, but because they were sexual outlaws. And I'm dedicating the award to all the sexual outlaws that were forced out of the country of their birth because of who God made them to be. And very particularly, I have in mind um, unmarried mothers, the Magdalene Laundries, who were equally ignominiously treated by the church and the state, sexual outlaws. So it's a coming of age of Ireland, and I'm simply a symbol of it, which I am delighted. I mean, a prophet is never accepted in his own country. But these awards and recognitions, I'm an old man now. I'm not too old, but I am an old man. I accept that gratefully and very lucky to be old. Many of my contemporaries, as Andy Hum and I will continuously say, and Tom McLaughlin and Richard Ferrara, didn't live this long. And getting these awards, I am reminded, and I've said this, that for me, it's like, it's okay being a legend in your own life as long as you don't take it seriously. And remember the Christ that we all try to follow. He got his award on a donkey going into Jerusalem. So that's how I see myself. Not as a donkey, but on a donkey. And it's lovely. It's lovely. It's lovely. It's a change because the Irish media were horrendous during the trial. I mean, incredible. Uh, you know, uh, literally assaulted my father's house and had cameras of him coming out and going to mass with an arrow coming out of his mouth saying, "My son is no monster." And my father wouldn't talk to anybody. He's a very quiet man, very private, the opposite of his son. And what he suffered and what my family suffered as a result of the witch hunt and the way the Irish media treated me, scapegoated me. at that time, you know. So I'm delighted for them. My father is still alive. That the tide has turned. You know.
Yeah, so a bit of vindication for them and
Yes,
a kind of maturing of
exactly,
the
exactly.
culture, but I think also a recognition that you were pivotal in bringing these things about. And let's not forget that. So if you're going to be riding a donkey there, I hope there are crowds to sing Hosanna and spread your path with palm branches and all of that. That would be most fitting, I think.
Right.
So um, before we open this up, there are probably those of you who know components of the story that I'm not aware of that you want to dig deeper into or have your own comments or questions for Bernard. But um, so think about all of that and we'll, you know, allow folks to just unmute and ask their question, or you can type it into chat, however you want to deal with it. But in the meantime, you know, here in the US, certainly, you know, we're seeing a backlash, I think, against, you know, the advances that the LGBTQ plus community has made in recent decades. And certainly our trans and non-binary kin are kind of the focus of that, but it's broadening. And I wonder how you read that, you know, and it's happening in other places around the world as well. So, you know, I'd love to get your take on that. And also any advice that you have for those of us who believe as Catholics we have a responsibility to protect the dignity and human rights of all people, especially the members of our community. What would you say to us?
I'm worried because, you know, I am a citizen of the United States. I mean, New York City is my home and like no other. I'm a New Yorker. I was born here. I came to life here. Um, and the United States, worldwide, it will, what happens here will affect Ireland as much as it does here. And that worries me. So it's not just about the United States at all. Uh, we take our lead for good or for ill. And Ireland is a wonderful country at the moment. I mean, it is a beacon of light. But it cannot stand up against the most powerful. And the most powerful always works, of course, for money and investment and all that kind, as we well know. I think, you know, in the darkest of winters, we still believe, we still hope, we still must fight for the right, irrespective. Because a saying of mine, time is on the side of love. And love alone will conquer. I have no doubt about it. Whether we're talking about the universe and climate change, the universe will have the last word, not us. And these people, and we know what it's about. It's about power. You know, it's about they want to take back the power, you know, white supremacist, patriarchal, heterosexist, men over women over children. We're not interested in that. We never were. And that was the upset from the very beginning, that we wanted to change the balance of power. We wanted a nation, talk about this country, my country of adoption, of co-equality. We're a long way from it. And yes, there is danger. But as long as there is one of us alive and saying no to the darkness and yes to the light, you know, they will not overcome. They cannot overcome because darkness cannot survive without the light. Um, keep on going, keep on going, keep on going. As far as being Catholic, I would say that dignity is as necessary today as it was the first day I walked into the Presbyterian Church in Lincoln Center, because you would not you personally, but you would be very naive to think that the power of religion can be left to the fundamentalists. We need to be there. We need to be saying, this is not Christ. You may think it is, but the one we follow spared no price, counted no cost, and died an ignominious death, disgraceful death. But that's why we believe in resurrection.
Yeah. Amen to that. We are an Easter people. Yeah.
We are an Easter people.
Yes. Yes. Friends, thank you, Bernard, for this. What comments, questions? What do you want to know more about? This is your time. Bernard's going to be heading back to Ireland with Billy all too soon for us. So this is your chance.
Well, I'll speak. I'm surprised in this group. I know most of you, and I know most of you are not shy about talking. But so I'll speak first. I've listened to most of the podcast, and it is wonderful. And it brought back so much of Bernard's story, and a lot of the details I did not know. Some of them are the details that Bernard has talked about tonight, but it just made your story, Bernard, so present. And I'm really just echoing what Marianne was saying. You know, it's so present, but it's so important to hear that story, especially as we're now seeing this backlash that Marianne talked about. I can't stop thinking about those kids in Florida, you know, where kids in high school, where let's say, you cannot talk about sexual orientation. You know, what are those kids supposed to do? You know, we know the stresses on these kids. You know, it's and for trans kids, it's even worse. But you know, this is the new persecution in my mind. This is the latest manifestation of the homophobia that existed during AIDS. But it's finding new targets, and it's not just us, obviously. I mean, it's this whole political movement, it's white supremacists, all those things you said. But I think you know, there's a maybe for some of the younger people, obviously the most critical moments of the AIDS crisis are not so present for them. Thank God they haven't experienced the horrors that took place in the 80s and the 90s. But this latest sort of backlash, I think, is in its own way just as destructive as what took place in the 70s and 80s. So thank you for coming, and thank you for the participating in the podcast, which is really masterfully done. I think it's so engaging, the voices, the details. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you.
I know when we talk about the current crisis, certainly at the board level for Dignity USA, you know, one of the things that we've realized is many of the young people, you know, up into their 20s and even 30s, who are now experiencing what it means to have all these institutions turning against them. You know, young people who grew up in a world that, you know, where being queer wasn't hidden to the same extent that it was for many of us in this room. And it wasn't, you know, there was a modicum for everybody, but in some places, a lot of social and even religious acceptance for them. And now they're experiencing that kind of trauma for the first time of being subject and being crucified, and, you know, just preparing for how do we address that kind of I guess trauma, you know, that we had hoped was behind us, and that generations wouldn't have to suffer again, you know. Cyclical evil in some ways.
It's a soul murder.
which is,
It's a soul murder. You're
yes,
murdering young people's souls by denying them the right to experience who they are. And I mean, it's got so little, if anything, to do with genitality. I mean, sexuality, as we so well know, is about the seat of our relationality. And that's what it is. And that's what the church could never forgive us for, that we weren't about, and that's what struck me the first night I went to Dignity at Lincoln Center. We're only here to worship. What's up with you? I mean, I equally will say sexuality as expressed love is wonderful, of course, but it's not just that. It's as much to do with how you appreciate art, music, as it has to falling in love. And to murder that in a child is evil. Is evil.
Yeah.
And we have to say no. We have to say, we are, a lot of us here, the elders, we have fought the good fight, and we have made love possible for so many people by loving ourselves. Yes.
Everybody on this call has fought the good fight, including with AIDS and fighting for their rights, all swimming against the tide. And it also, beyond the burden of it, it is life-giving to do this kind of work. But when and by the way, in terms, when you talk about the kids of today who are certainly under siege, they're fighting back. They're not going to take this.
Yeah.
They know better. But my question for you, Bernard, is with the intensity of the AIDS work that you did, and you say, well, it had to be done, it had to be done, it had to be done. But what was it giving you to do this work at that time to sustain you through it?
A good question, Andy. What was it giving me? I suppose I experienced a form of intimacy with people that is very difficult and very rare, except with the few woman or man you love or few intimate friends you have. There was no hiding. You got straight to the heart, not just the heart of the matter, but the heart of the person, and they got to your heart. There was no bullshit, none whatever. How could there be? The first guy that I really got close to is Stuart Garcia. I've spoken about him often. He died at 23. Met him at Julius's, which was my office at the time. I was living in the Bronx, so I'd come down to Julius's to meet people. And he was the president at Columbia University Student Union, brilliant student from Texas. And we had met on the running track. And when I saw him at Julius's, he had mostly sarcoma here. And he looked at me and he just said, this was like, I suppose, 81, 82, I'm not sure. He said to me, Bernard, do you believe in God? Now, he was Episcopalian by birth. And I looked at him and I said, Stuart, I don't know. I don't know. I was just after graduating with a doctorate, and then I said, I hope, Stuart. And that's all I can say today. And that's over 40, nearly 50 years ago, 40 years ago at least. I hope. I do hope. But this is not a hope. This is not an intellectual hope. This is a hope of the heart. That in the end, Stuart is okay. And all the Stuarts and all our friends and lovers and families, they're okay. And that we too will be okay. I'm not a pious person, but that faith is going to keep us going, no matter what the others say. I mean, as you all know, religion can be a terrible thing, and all religion at a level is about the denial of God, but we, particularly dignity, we ought to be able to, and we have as an organization, we've transcended the church and found a freedom that surpasses knowledge. Freedom in yourself, a freedom in the heart, a freedom to be free, a freedom to love, a freedom to have joy, even in the face of the most terrible suffering and death. We have found that, and nobody's going to take that away. And that's what we're fighting for with these kids, irrespective of their background in religion. It doesn't matter. Dignity in New York, I was saying to Richard Ferrara, I mean, people would come there with their yarmulkes in the day, and come up with the Holy Communion. I remember, and he hold up the host, and a guy with his yarmulke, and he'd say, "Body of Christ," and he said, "I remember, Christ is risen." Sure is, I'm saying to myself, it was a place of absolute welcome without discrimination. And that's the kind of the God we as dignity people believe in, is a God of pure extravagance, a God without borders, a God without boundaries, a God without religion.
Yes, nothing narrows God like religion.
Yeah.
Yes. Richard, yes.
Yes. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Bernard, everybody. Anyone who knows me knows that Zoom is not my forum. It's not my thing. I much prefer in person, but this is small and intimate. And so I'm grateful for this evening. Bernard, it was really lovely seeing you last week and then at liturgy, and everybody. Let's see. And by the way, whenever I really brought anyone to dignity in the last few years, I don't think any of the people I've ever brought were Catholic. They were Hindi, Anglican, agnostic. I don't think nobody I think was Catholic. So, and they are always welcome to the fullest extent. So I want to let you know that that part has never changed. And certainly, so anyway, in 12-step recovery, where I am, as a lot of us know, and when I work the steps and all this kind of thing, it's basically not my business to know, first off, what you think of me, but also it's not so much even my business how much I have helped you, and I apply that to current state of affairs. All of us have been around for quite a while in the queer movements, and Andy said it pretty well, that there's a lot of young people fighting out now. And they're going to discover their, battles long after I'm gone, and all of us are gone. I don't think any good energy is ever wasted. I think what we've done in dignity, and pretty much the reason I stay, and is well, and the reason why I stayed in the 80s when we were thrown out of the church was like, hell, how dare you tell me I'm not welcome? So we'll go back to your church, as you know, from the Cathedral Project on. Ratzinger sealed the deal with me. I would, I'm going to my grave as a Catholic. I mean, that's what I choose. And I have my faith. My faith is big, and it's a lot bigger than Catholicism by far. But and I know I'm welcome at the table. So yeah, you've done a tremendous amount for us and with us and by us and to us. That's a joke. And but and here's the thing too, even Dignity unto itself. I mean, I love Dignity. I just renewed my membership 5 days ago. It was late. I didn't even know it. I mean, I got the warning letters and I sent my check in because I believe in the force of numbers and all. And I am a part of Dignity. But just like, and here's this, I don't know what this comparison is, and I'll try to be brief on this. As we know, the Sisters of Charity New York are not, they're ending there. It's that completion of their order, and they even have that term. That doesn't take away all the greatness and wonder and beauty that they've done for, since Mother Ann Seton, whatever. And after we are all gone, and maybe Dignity too, it had its time, it had its place in history. And I really believe that what we have done, and I know this from my own family and extensive family and friends and people, that the repercussions of all that we did affirmatively has affected, from all the things. Francis was a bishop in Argentina, whatever, or a priest in Argentina. He knew who we were. They all knew who we were. And it just, everything entered the vernacular in those 1980s and 90s and everything. So we've done great. Bernard, you've done great. I hope Dignity goes on for a very, very long time. And all, but nothing what we've done, what you've done, any one of us is doing is in vain. And it's not so much our business what's going to happen for any of us, beyond us in this little group tonight, beyond Dignity, beyond the queer community, beyond the next election. I'll end it with this. In program, we say, do your part and let go of the results.
Oh.
And so thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Richard. And Bernard, thank you. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for being a leader in the community. Thank you for all of the people whose lives and deaths you graced in your work. Thank you for spending the time with us tonight. And again, we will be making the recording of this event accessible to people who are not able to be here tonight, whether here in the US or around the world, across Ireland, across Europe, wherever folks may want to see it. These are stories that need to be told. We need to bear witness to all that has happened. So thank you, everyone, for being here. And again, Bernard, thank you so much for taking time from your and Billy's vacation
thank you so
visit
much.
this chapter.
Thank you for having me and the time.
Thank you, Bernardo.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Mary
you.
Ann. Thank you, Marianne.